Hello and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I want to talk about 3 simple tips to help you save for travel. So if you've got a trip later on this year or you have to travel for something specifically, I want to talk about ways that you can save for this relatively quickly. And that's because recently I took a trip to Washington DC. I have a business coach who was doing an event there, and so I needed to be able to save for that travel, especially because I realized that Washington is very expensive. I mean, who charges $7 just for an ice cream? But anyway, in today's video, I want to talk through 3 simple things that you can do to make sure that you have enough savings for your trip and how to save money very quickly if your trip is coming relatively soon. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I also have a bonus tip for you too. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first tip I want to give you when it comes to saving up for your travel is to find out what's most cost effective when it comes to travel and accommodation. Now, when I'm talking about what's cost effective, I'm talking about, of course, your accommodation if you're going to be staying overnight when you travel, and also how you plan to get there. So the transport you're going to take. If you're leaving the country, you're probably going to fly, but you may also take the train or anything like that. But specifically, if you're thinking about flying somewhere to another country, like I flew to the US, I needed to look at, okay, what is going to be the most cost effective? Is it that I should try and book everything separately? So I should buy my flight tickets in one place and then buy my accommodation in another place? Or should I think about actually getting a package? So in my case, I actually ended up buying the flight and the hotel together because they were doing a current sale on there. And so it was actually better for me to do that deal and make savings there rather than pay separately. But you may find that actually you want to buy things separately because it's much more cost effective. So you just want to find out, okay, what's cost effective? It doesn't have to take long doing this either. The research can literally take a few minutes because all you need to look at is, okay, let's see if there's a deal with actually buying the airline, the flight ticket plus the hotel, or let's see if it's better to do it separately. And of course, you'll want to take into consideration convenience as well. But if you're actually trying to save money, then looking at what's cost effective when it comes to accommodation and travel will definitely make sense. If you're a part of my email list, then get ready because I'm going to be starting a weekly series on helping you to save a lot more money and also start investing as well. So if you're not subscribed but you want access to those weekly series, then make sure you do subscribe. The link will be up here and in the description below. Plus, I'm also going to be sharing some exclusive content just for those subscribers too. So make sure you join us. Okay, so the next saving tip I want to give you is to start creating a dedicated sinking fund for travel. Now, when I'm talking about creating a sinking fund, this just means that when you have an expense, you're planning to save up for it over time. So rather than you paying everything in one go, you're simply just setting aside a little bit of money every now and then in order for you to then pay for something later on. Now, this can actually be really helpful if you don't know where you're going to be traveling to. So let's say that it is your 30th birthday this year and you want to be able to travel somewhere, but you're not sure when and you're not sure where. You can actually start creating a dedicated sinking fund for travel. So what that means is that you can start putting a small amount of money into your savings for that travel fund and call it a travel fund. And so every time you get paid, you can be putting a small amount in there so that when you do decide to travel, or if an amazing deal comes up, you have money sitting in your account and you then don't have to depend on debt to pay for it. Because I find that, you know, for many people, especially if they do want to do spontaneous trips, when they want to do that spontaneous trip, they don't actually have the money. And so many people end up going into credit card debt and having to pay all of this interest because they wanted to travel. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to have to pay any form of interest at all, definitely consider creating a separate dedicated sinking fund for your travel. So even if you don't know where you're going or when you're going, you know that you're still putting money aside so that when you do decide, oh, I found a really good deal with this airline and I really want to be able to travel there, you actually have money in your savings account. And this is exactly what I tell my clients to do, especially if I know that they love to travel and that's something that they enjoy doing. I just get them to create a sinking fund so that whenever they're ready to travel, then of course they have money sitting in their account account, and it means they don't have to dip into their other savings, plus they also don't have to rely on debt just to travel. You could also do this if you've maybe booked a package and you only need to pay a deposit. So for instance, in my case, when I was traveling to DC, we booked a package with the airline, but it meant that we only needed to pay a deposit. And then after that, I think it was like 3 months before we were set to travel, that's when we would need to pay the rest of the money. So instead of me waiting until the time that I actually had to pay the money and just pull out a few hundred out of my paycheck to pay for that trip, what I did is I created a dedicated sinking fund for that travel. And so I told myself, okay, this is how much I want to be putting aside each month in order for me to have enough money so that by the time I need to pay everything, it doesn't really hurt because I've just been saving a little amount each time. So this method works even if you haven't decided where you're going to be traveling to. But if you have, and let's say you've paid a deposit, that's also something that you can do. You can still create a sinking fund so that it's just a bit easier for you when it comes to actually making the payment later on. And if you're liking this video so far, then feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really does help to support the channel. Plus, I'm sure you know, it's free. Okay, so the next tip I want to give you when it comes to saving for your trip is to remember to save for your spending as well. Now, what I mean by this is, okay, so you've booked the flights, you've booked the hotel or the Airbnb, you know exactly where you're going. But one of the things that I realized that people miss out on is that they don't actually consider saving for their spending whilst they're on the trip. So people tend to book their hotel and their flights, but then when they get to the trip, sometimes they'll just kind of spend the money and then they'll realize that they've overspent because they didn't plan for it. And so they may end up going into debt, or again having to dip into their savings. So one big tip I would give you is you want to be able to also save for your spending. And again, you can create a sinking fund for this where you simply put aside some money in order for you to have spending money by the time you go on your trip. And I will say that it does really feel good when you know that you're going to spend money on this trip and you've simply planned for it and it is just sitting in your account waiting to be spent. I hardly ever feel guilty spending money when I'm on a trip because I simply save for it. I simply plan for it. And so I know that the money is there to be spent. That's its purpose. So when it comes to saving for your spending money, one thing you could do is just pick a number in terms of how much you think you will spend on this trip and make sure it is realistic. In fact, I think you should be a bit more generous because you don't want to be trying to count pennies whilst you're on the trip. You want to make sure that you actually have enough money. And then once you have that number, I would probably do like a 10% contingency on top so that just in case you do end up going over that number, that's also okay. So let's say, for example, that you think 500 is going to be enough for you to spend and probably is actually more than enough, then I would probably aim to save about 550 just to make sure that again you have enough money, because the worst case scenario is that you just don't spend all of the money and then you just bring the money back and you can add that back into your sinking fund, or you can add it to your savings, or you can do anything else with it. So what I would say is definitely try to be realistic, be a little bit more generous so that you actually have more money to spend, because if you then don't end up spending it, then that's just a bonus. And that's essentially what tends to happen to me whenever I go on a trip. I will usually over budget for that trip, for the spending money. And so when I then save for that, by the time I go on the trip, I don't normally end up spending most of that money just because I've really prepared for it. And so I end up having some money to bring back and I can just add that to my savings or something else. And again, when it comes to saving up for that spending money, you can of course include that in your dedicated travel fund so that maybe every month when you get paid, you just put a small amount to make sure that of course you're saving for your travel and your accommodation, but also you're spending money as well. Okay, and the bonus saving tip I want to give you is if you're saving for a trip, consider using a credit card. Now, I definitely want you to be very careful when I'm talking about using a credit card. Please note that I am not saying use credit card debt. You will never catch me telling you to use credit card debt. impossible, okay? But what I'm saying is, if you are someone who knows how to manage your money well, you know how to save, then consider using a credit card, because not only does it give you added protection if something happens to your trip, but also when it comes to using a credit card, potentially some of these credit cards can give you cash back, or they can also give you airline miles. So what that means is, if you end up booking a flight, you potentially could use some of your credit card points so that it basically contributes to that flight, and you won't end up having to spend as much money when you're booking that flight. So this is something that I tend to do as well. So if I see that I have a load of points and I'm booking a flight somewhere, I will potentially use some of my points to book that flight. So that's why a credit card can be useful. But I will stress, the only reason why I am able to take advantage of this is because I know how to save money and I know how to manage my money. If I didn't know how to do this, there would be no point in me using a credit card, because I would just be in credit card debt, and then that would defeat the purpose of actually using the points, because I won't be saving money, I'll just be giving money to the creditor via interest, right? So when it comes to using a credit card, make sure you know how to save money, make sure you know how to manage your money, so that using a credit card can actually help you rather than hurt you. Now, in one-on-one coaching, my goal is to not only help you manage your money better, but it's to help you actually save for those trips as well as other goals. So if you're trying to save for a house deposit or an emergency fund or a car or anything like that, I will basically help you to not only save for your holidays, for your trips, but you will also save for those other goals so that you can actually reach them when you want to reach them. So make sure you book a call with me to find out more about one-on-one coaching and how I can help you save more money. The link will be up here for you and in the description below. But when it comes to saving up for a trip, it doesn't have to be this long, complicated process. It can be quite simple, and also it can be fun. Even if you don't know where you're going to be traveling to, it is something that you can prepare for in advance so that you can enjoy the trip and the memories that come with it without having to depend on debt to fund it. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments, have you got any trips down the line that you're saving for? I do post every Sunday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next week.